Fighting game box art covers are sometimes tough to nail down. Do you display a whole roster of colorful characters to show your potential buyers what they're in for? Do you represent the genre in its most honest form by showing two characters facing off? What about just your poster boy with the brand speaking for itself? Or for some games, even less than that. Now, just so we're clear, arcade marquees are a totally different ballgame in a video on its own. When I say box art, I'm talking about the art on the case of the retail game. In a way, they serve the same purpose, as they want you to pay attention to this game and ultimately buy it. For fighting game box art, it's really interesting to see what gets remembered as truly legendary and what gets forgotten seemingly regardless of the game's quality. An example of exceptional box art is the PAL and Japanese cover of the PS1 version of Capcom vs SNK Pro. This cover celebrates the crossover of these two series by having characters mostly paired up with their rivals, which gives a good taste of the colorful cast. But when you look at the American version, holy shit, what a fumble. This particular cover was also the box art for the vanilla release of the American and PAL regions. I just think it's odd that they chose to have Terry as their point man over Kyo to rep SNK. Normally it should be Kyo, who is the main SNK rep, always paired up with Ryu. Unlike Terry, Kyo even has a special intro with Ryu in-game. Maybe they thought that Terry looked more American and masculine and would appeal more to an American audience, versus Kyo, who might come off as some weak-looking pretty boy, therefore wouldn't be as good of a visual rival to Ryu. I guess that makes sense, but why is it just the most boring design ever, with Terry looking like he just remembered something important, and Ryu's image just being a cut and paste from his Alpha 3 render? This could have been an opportunity to do something like the original Dreamcast release in Japan, which showcased the clash between Kyo and Ryu. And I just love this image because it shows the impact and excitement of the fight between these two universes, showing Ryu is taking on quite the handful from his new foe, and Kyo just excited for the challenge despite him getting punched in the face. I feel like Kyo was relatively unknown with people in the States, and this cover would perhaps catch their attention, followed by intrigue as to who this new guy was giving Ryu such a hard time while he grits a smile through his shared pain. The Japanese box art replicates this cover for the Dreamcast version of CVS1 Pro, paying homage to that same impact between rivals. Even when it's each series' respective chuckleheads, it doesn't make the impact of these hits any less serious. When it was SNK's turn to make their version of this crossover, they did kind of the same thing, but just right before impact. No pun intended, but it just doesn't hit as hard as the others. SNK kind of plays it safe here since so many crossovers after this one seem to do the same thing. Don't even get me started on the Capcom vs SNK 2 box art. For the original Dreamcast release in Japan, don't get me wrong, this illustration in Shakira style is amazing. This is evident if you look at the original piece uncropped from the restrictions of the Dreamcast disc case. But I can't help but feel SNK kinda getting ripped off here. First of all, it's just Chun-Li dead center, not paired with any SNK character like Mai or something. So that balance seems a bit off. Also, Maki, Kyosuke, Yun, and Yang are hogging up all of the space on the square here. Haomaru's face is obstructed by the logo, and a sliver of Iori and Kyo can barely be seen. Near the Dreamcast logo, if this isn't Ken like I think it is, even if it is an SNK character, the fact that it's hard to recognize says more about the box art design than it does about me. Also, why is Yang anywhere near this cover? I know he pops up for intros and special moves and stuff for Yun, but if I didn't know any better, I think that Yang is playable in this game. I feel like it should be an unwritten rule to not include anyone that isn't playable or even fightable to any degree on the cover of your fighting game. This doesn't even compare to the design issues of the later releases of this game, like the one of Kyosuke pointing at you. To its credit, this is a cool striking image of Guy pointing at you with an eye-catching color, but the issue is, why is Kyosuke on this cover? Rival schools did have success outside of Japan, but it's not like this is the main rival schools guy that was on the cover before. It's someone that most people aren't even gonna know. Go ahead, point Kyosuke out. Right next to Kyosuke is Kim in a different art style. Kim isn't helping things either, since he's not exactly the most well-known character in a series that's not well-known outside of Japan and Latin America. Also, Maki and Sagat in the background. I know Capcom made the game and all, but for God's sake, show some symmetry here. which I guess thankfully got fixed in the EO version of this game, having geese instead, thus allowing for the character reps to be balanced. When I first saw this game as a kid, between these two guys, I had no idea who was SNK and who was the Capcom guy, despite one of them being in the previous game. The best cover from CVS2, in my opinion, is the Japanese EO box art with Kyo and Ryu side by side all pissed off, with a color contrasting Harumaru dead center. I would have preferred Harumaru be paired with another Capcom character here, but I guess this is the one that annoys me the least. If you look at another Capcom vs. series, the Marvel vs. games were on another level here. At least for the Japanese box art, just filling the box with chaotic energy and sensory overload, or a colorful cast getting together and squaring off, or something beautiful and experimental like with MVC2. Speaking of MVC2, compare this particular cover to America's. I mean, it's passable, but seems kinda boring in comparison. Going back a little further, looking at the American Dreamcast cover being the most confusing, having Psylocke and Guile, characters who aren't exactly new to the series or even the most recognizable. Looking at MVC3, the vanilla release, or Fate of the Two Worlds as it's actually called, has box art that I feel gets a lot of hate. But the box art is better than the Ultimate one. Now, hear me out here. This one has the better art in my opinion, but this one is the better cover. The vanilla cover shows the most recognizable characters from both sides, and it gives a vibe that this could be a comic cover Marvel might have at this time, because they're trying to appeal to Marvel fans, and I'm sure you won't dispute that Marvel has a larger fan base between them. The Ultimate one is great, but it's a style that perhaps those Marvel fans wouldn't like all too much in comparison. Also, I know they want to pimp out the new characters, but Hawkeye is dead center of the cover. Only comic book fans would even recognize this as Hawkeye, since he's not in the generic outfit the casual movie-going Marvel fan would even recognize. Even if he was in that getup, Hawkeye is not going to sell this game for most people. I feel the vanilla release is the better sell to those casuals, despite the fact that some of their faces look a bit off, like Chun-Li doesn't really look Asian, and Hulk just looks like a screaming frat bro. The perfect compromise is the GameStop exclusive physical release of UMVC3 for Xbox and PS4, where it's done the same art style as Ultimate by Shinkiro, but has Ryu and Wolverine in the center fighting, with some of the other popular and iconic characters surrounding them in a typhoon of characters. Even the more obscure characters help this cover, since it just shows to anybody who looks at this in passing the plethora of characters available in this game, and also rewards those that take a closer look at the cover with the deep cuts this game has to offer. A series that has knocked it out of the park every single time in terms of huge crossover box art is Smash Bros., having a bunch of characters squaring off or them exploding out of the cover. My only minor little gripe is that in Ultimate's cover, Mario looks a little bit off to me, like he's not exactly excited to be here like everyone else, who looks either hyped or determined. His face was always off-putting to me, but again, just a minor gripe. If you want to see the worst example of a crossover fighter's box art, look no further than PS All-Stars in all territories. These are just renders of characters slapped together around the logo, and some of them are renders from different games. The title has the phrase Battle Royale, but having all these characters doesn't give the impression of a fighting game. It makes me feel like it's some sort of party game, which Sony has fooled people before thinking a big crossover of their IPs wasn't just the minigame collection with its box art. This is just so disappointing to me when they could have gone all the way with this, like their direct competitors have. A game I just talked about that just cuts and pastes renders, like CVS2 in the States, at least has amazing art and a striking, eye-catching color going for it. This box art just shows me somebody wanted to go home early. I suppose they just incorrectly assumed that having the likes of Kratos, Sackboy, Big Daddy, etc. that this would sell it alone, but oh well. Going the opposite direction of having all the characters crammed into the cover, you gotta admire the balls of the Mortal Kombat series just having the dragon logo for the majority of their covers. In MK 1 through 11, this logo shows up in all the original release box art of the series, at least in America. There have been times where it's been excluded, but that's far and few in between, and usually an updated version of the game. My personal favorite of the MK covers with just the logos is Deadly Alliance, since the sharp, bloody metal object here is kind of a hidden Roman numeral 5. Kind of being a little inside secret to longtime fans to let them know, guys, this game isn't a hard reboot, it's just been a while, we have to save face with the casuals here, but you know what this is? We're not gonna abandon you like that. Perhaps I'm reading too much into that. Mortal Kombat Armageddon has the least interesting version of the Mortal Kombat logo just being super zoomed in and the logo not being stylized at all really. This basic cover to me was the best advertising for the special editions that they could have asked for. The special editions for Armageddon were really something special though. Depending on which store you went to, the cover was a different pair of characters on the steelbook. Having two rivals staring at the camera, getting ready to settle their differences once and for all, since they might not get the chance again after this game. Unless you had it on Wii and Xbox, then get fucked, it's the logo for you. This brand confidence can work in the reverse, however. Take Dead or Alive 2 Hardcore's PS2 cover. In the US, this is just the acronym, no explanations, for a series that isn't exactly a household name yet. All other region covers are way better, at least showing attractive characters, but this just does not stand out compared to the other two fighting game covers it was competing with at the PS2 launch in the States. Of course, there are some fighting game covers that surpass the bubble of the FGC and are some of the most recognizable covers of all time. This illustration from Street Fighter Alpha 2 is debatably more recognizable than the gameplay from the game itself, at least to a person who doesn't really play fighting games. Easy to forget that Sakura is actually in the background. I wonder if omitting her would have made this better to keep the focus on Ryu and Akuma, who, yes, is not this tall. This box art is the perfect encapsulation of the underdog, and I think that's why it resonates so well with everyone. Capcom knew what they had here, and they used it for almost all versions worldwide. And how did they follow up on one of the most iconic illustrations of all time? Capcom, for the most part, was on another level when doing box art for Japan during their fighting game oversaturation phase in the 90s. Though for some reason in the States was kinda shit, and even when they had something cool, they loved doing this torn page thing for their PS1 releases. PAL regions were all over the place. Sometimes they get the Japanese ones, and sometimes they get the one from North America. With the later releases of Street Fighter, most regions have the same covers, which is kind of a bummer because these are just boring to me. And yes, I know, everyone hates the Street Fighter 6 box art and I'm right there with you. Capcom is really putting it all on Luke and the name of the game alone to sell this to people who are passing by at a store. The steelbook that I got with this game is just okay, but it's way better than the default box art. Just slap the logo somewhere here and it would be marginally better than before. I remember when the physical CD for the soundtrack of Street Fighter 6 was shown off, and people said that this should have been the box art all along. While yes, I do love this art more than the render of Luke, I feel like the CD art would just get lost in the crowd of other games, especially with how dark and colorless this is. With how busy it is, it might be hard to immediately recognize the characters at a glance. Again, just looking at this from a marketing perspective, I can see the CD cover not working out, but maybe I'm wrong here. If we look at Tekken, we can see that they always go for the poster boy approach. Every single mainline Tekken game across all regions will have a Mishima family member in there one way or another. Out of the gate, Tekken had some good box art to show off the colorful cast. They're all arranged in a dynamic way to make it seem like any of these guys can be the main character. It's also cool that the lower and smaller characters are the secret characters. Hard to see, which adds to the intrigue of who these characters even are. Maybe once you unlock them, you can get a better look. Tekken 2 does this in a way I think is a bit better, where everyone looks like they're in the calm before the storm, with Heihachi looming over everyone else, showing that their personal desires and vendettas to get to Kazuya have to be stronger than the big bad boss of the last game. At least that's how I interpret this. Tekken 3 actually takes their box art directly from the arcade intro of Jin getting ready for the next battle, and I think this is perfect. This is as simple as it gets. Just a guy getting ready to fight who's clearly not fucking around. Most people at this time wouldn't even know who this guy was since this is Jin's debut. for those who did play the previous Tekkens, it adds intrigue, like, wait, that's not Kazuya, but he kinda looks like him. So it works on both levels. I'm usually not a fan of these CG types of box art, but Tekken shows how it should be done. Plus, Tekken is a 3D game. That has to be shown off at least in some way. Tekken has consistently done a great job with their box art throughout the entire series, with Tekken 4 having this dark, evil undertone that matches the seriousness of the title, and Tekken 5 being colorful and vibrant, which really emphasizes the departure of tone from 4. Tekken 6 is probably the least interesting since it's just the cast with a dark background, but I still think it's pretty good. Just probably the safest they could have done and doesn't really take any risk. Oh, wait, maybe this is actually the perfect box art for this game. Tekken 7 is legendary though. Kazuya and Heihachi's mugs side by side showing their two sides of the same coin, and maybe not so different. I imagine this is their faces looking at each other for their final battle at the volcano that started it all and will now end it all. One of the rare cases where the Japanese version is great, but just not as incredible as the other regions. Tekken 8 has a good follow-up to this box art, being Kazuya and Jin back-to-back showing their opposing beliefs, where Kazuya wants to grasp onto all the power he can, whereas Jin wants to rid himself of both the Mishima Zaibatsu and the devil gene inside him. They could have easily done the whole two guys punching each other like they did for the Steelbook, but this one I feel is more suitable for the series. SNK's box art. How many iconic pieces do we have to work with here? SNK goes all in every time. SNK even goes all out for just releasing an older game like KOF 98 Unlimited Match on the PS2 with this snazzy cover. Even for collection games like they did for the PS2, they don't hold back. Even for their lesser games, the art carries it, and I'm sure tricked people into buying it because the art was so good. It's hard to find a bad box art for any of the SNK fighters, so I'm happy to say I found one, and here you go. KOF 12 and 13 did the really cool idea of having completely different box art depending on the system you got it for. To me, both the Xbox covers are just a little more standout, but thankfully both versions are excellent. Soul Calibur, to me, I feel frequently gets overlooked. The first game, Soul Edge or Soul Blade outside of Japan, starts off kinda poorly with Mitsurugi just standing awkwardly with two swords he doesn't use in gameplay. He just has the one, with the other characters scrambled behind him. Maybe they were trying to have Mitsurugi as the poster boy here, but I don't feel like it's working out since it's not a very exciting box art. PAL has Voldo front and center on the cover instead. Excuse me? Soul Calibur box art on the Dreamcast is an improvement, but I feel it's too abstract to make out what kind of game this is, regardless if you're just a passerby or staring at the cover intently. I know people probably love this box art, but be honest, is this box art really that good, or are people just blinded by nostalgia? After this, Soul Calibur does a better job with the abstractness of the idea here in all three versions of Soul Calibur 2. Having a different color Soul Calibur, or in the Xbox's case, Soul Edge, located dead center of the cover gives off the impression that the fighters are drawn together by the blade. None of the box art repeats characters, and they even have the system's exclusive guest character above the rest of the cast as well. I think this was done to have them be the primary focus of the would-be buyer's attention, to show you, hey, look who we got in here. Small little gripe, but it's kind of hard to tell this is Link and just not some elf guy that's original to Soul Calibur. I think it's hard to tell he has the iconic hat on and not just his hair being really long. But hey, maybe I'm just blind. All of Soul Calibur's box art after this are incredible, but you can tell that they really like to have that guest character front and center. Which, I get it, it's gonna help sell copies. As great as they all look, however, the negative to having these guest characters so prominent is that it gives the false impression that these characters have a bigger role than they actually do in the game. So in that regard, I can kinda see that backfiring. Like with Geralt, you'd think Mitsurugi is his longtime rival and not just some random cameo in the story. Lastly, if we look at anime fighters, they kinda have an uphill battle from where I see it. Since its anime art style is so distinct and most of the game's identity, it pretty much has to be in the cover no matter what, it seems. Covers like Under Night in Birth, Persona and BlazBlue are great, but for certain people, they will see the anime art style and just keep moving. The first release of BlazBlue tried to do something different, having Noelle aim her guns in a very un-anime art style with Western-style graffiti in the background. I actually don't think the art is bad at all, but if you show this cover to someone who doesn't know fighting games at all, and you ask them what genre this is, they're most likely gonna say a shooter. Guilty Gear, I feel, breaks free from these anime chains. The game itself, at least the first two games, are grungy and gritty and don't exactly have that clean modern anime look. More like a 90s anime, which is reflected in their box art. With the first game on the PS1, I feel like the disorganized nature of it is kinda punk and rebellious, just like the game. Even when Guilty Gear got pretty graphics in its later entries, it doesn't lose its personality in the process with the box art. It's sad a conversation like this is on borrowed time, since physical media is kind of becoming the way of vinyl records, where it's mainly for collectors who want the full package of the game and the art. Since the box art in a game kind of is its album cover, if that makes sense. I really hope we still live in a world where we talk about box art regardless of genre, but who knows, maybe in the future people will be more nostalgic for the home menu icon the game has instead.